Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. Back in our St. Louis studios, we are joined by a man who's been on several television screens this week, the Attorney General of the state of Missouri, Eric Schmitt. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
So I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to have heard about this now. It's one of those things that's like, well, why didn't somebody else think of this? But Missouri was the first state in the entire union to actually file suit against China for their deceptive practices with this coronavirus, Wuhan virus, whatever you call it, COVID-19. Break down for me exactly what you think they did.
Sure. So what we've come to know is that the Chinese government engaged in a campaign of deception and deceit, misdirection, misrepresentations, malfeasance, hiding information, destroying evidence, silencing whistleblowers, all in an effort to hide the origin of the coronavirus and then halting its spread. I mean, the sad reality is, if it would have been contained early on, we wouldn't be dealing with the situation that we're dealing with now. And the truth is, no part of the world has been spared from this and from their actions or their inactions. I mean, you see on a human level, enormous loss of life and business disruption. Here in Missouri, we're not spared from that. Over 200 lives lost, 6,000 plus cases now. And the business interruption, I mean, we've lost 26 million jobs in the United States of America in the last 2 months, and Missouri's not immune from that. You know, our brothers and sisters are living paycheck to paycheck, have lost their jobs, and this whole industry is on hold. This is unprecedented. And this is about getting to the truth of holding those accountable for their actions or their inactions, and that blame lays squarely at the feet of the Chinese government, which is why, look, I'm the chief legal officer of the state of Missouri. The people look to me in our office to represent them. And when you see that kind of damage, when you see that kind of impact, I felt a moral obligation to bring this case. And it's a very meritorious case that we believe that will be successful and that other states are going to take a look at this complaint and file suit.
So there is one thing I've noted about this is, you know, it's very fashionable these days to bang on the media. It probably always is, maybe more so now. One thing about China, if you have this going on in China, the media can't report on it. The government approves everything they do. Everything is a form of an NPR for China. It is an impossibility to think this could have happened in America because you're as a free press that would have reported there's not 10,000 deaths, there's 100,000 deaths. You could not have covered this up in a free country. And I think maybe that might make you think twice when companies locate their supply chains in China. You don't really know what's happening there like you would in Pittsburgh or you know, in Butler County.
Well, what we know from published media reports, actually, is that there were critical weeks that were lost here where they were aware, the Chinese government was aware of the human-to-human transmission. And the fact that, you know, millions of people went through Wuhan, now not as many to mainland China because they were aware of it, but throughout the globe, all the while they knew of this, they're hoarding PPE. China, interestingly, and we spelled out in the complaint, went from a net exporter of PPE to a net importer of PPE, and the world was left in the dark as to the true origin and the deadliness of this virus. And so that's part of our claim. So essentially what our claim is from a legal perspective is, and some people might say, you can't sue China, it's a foreign country or it's a sovereign nation. The truth of the matter is, under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, there are exceptions to that general rule. One of those exceptions, which we claim in the lawsuit, is the fact that they're engaged in commercial activity puts them outside of that general protection. The commercial activity that we allege is they're running a virology lab in Wuhan, they're running hospitals as well, and they're hoarding this PPE as part of commercial activity. So because they're engaged in those activities, it's a very different kind of case. And I think as legal experts take a look at this complaint now, they're understanding our claim, and it's very well thought out, and you're seeing other states now indicate that they're going to join.
Look, it's a campaign year, 2020. You lose sight of that a little bit in this crisis, and you know, there's some lawyers, I would say lawyers aren't known for being the most conservative profession of all. I understand the critiques of it, but I'll say this, if you're just a guy in West Plains, sitting at home, can't open his gun store because there's the law says he can't, I don't know that they don't like that somebody's actually doing something, if nothing else, just in the public sphere to remind folks, the guy in West Plains who's going broke right now, it's just not his fault.
Well, the response that I've gotten is I think people are glad that somebody's actually sticking up for them. And I am proud of the fact that Missouri is the first state in the country to do it. We ought to be in the lead on more of these kinds of things where we're holding these sort of bad actors accountable. And if that means China in this instance, that's fine, because that's where the blame is. If you look at the facts here, this was covered up. People have gone missing. Whistleblowers were silenced. They lied. We still are dealing with some of that those misstatements and that misdirection that they're giving. I mean, they've got Chinese agents now sending out text messages that the president's going to shut down the whole country to stoke panic. I mean, this is a broad and sweeping indictment, I think, of that regime. And by the way, one of the other things on the legal perspective that we point out, not only do they fall into the exception under the FSIA that I mentioned earlier, we also name non-state actors like the Chinese Communist Party and other non-state actors because, look, they are directly controlling who is in the seat of power there. So we believe strongly in the merits of the claim, and I think you're going to see people intuitively understand this. They understand that something went wrong in China, and the facts are that they covered it up, and now the world is dealing with it, including Missourians. So we allege tens of billions of dollars worth of damages here because that's how we've been impacted. Family members have been separated from loved ones in nursing homes, not being able to attend funerals, all of that. And then you look at the economic impact. You've got the legislature going in next week to try to craft a state budget under these circumstances. The withholds that are taking place now because of this cataclysmic event that's unprecedented, at least in our lifetime. And so we think that the Chinese government ought to be held accountable for that.
Let's talk about another issue. I think, part of this, the China lawsuit is making more people aware of this might make people less apt to do this in the future, which to me is like price gouging. There's been tons of price gouging, profiteering off this situation. You may not be able to stop everyone, but talk about the work you're doing to maybe even make an example out of a few people.
Yeah, so we've very early on in this pandemic, we issued a number of consumer alerts about price gouging. We made the online form that people can go at ago.mo.gov, very streamlined and easy. We've received well over 1,000 calls as it relates to price gouging. And so we entered into some pretty unique partnerships with the grocers, with the hospital association, with private actors too, like Amazon and Facebook Marketplace, to say, hey, look, let's work together to crack down on price gouging, because as people are working to keep themselves safe and their families safe, the last thing they need is people trying to take advantage of them in this situation. So we've issued a number of subpoenas, cease and desist orders. We've taken actually people to court, including Jim Baker for trying to sell a fake product.
That.
Yeah, I mean, some people in my office that were under the age of 30 didn't remember who Jim Baker was, but I did. But he was,
you remember Tammy Faye, if you don't remember Jim, right?
Yeah, he was.
And who knew he's in Branson?
Yeah, and was touting something called Silver Solutions, which was a purported cure for coronavirus, which of course is false. He was touting that on his show. So we've taken a lot of action and been very active, and just doing things like PSAs. We were active on social media, letting people know, hey, these kind of scams are out there. Watch what your kids are doing online. There's a lot of things that we've been doing to try to educate the public, because these are just unprecedented times.
So there's an issue that we've talked about really since you became Attorney General. You've made a big push to get some of these rape kits tested. When the world stops for now, is it 5 weeks? What is the effect on that? Are labs able to do this? Are the labs being converted to test for COVID-19? What happens with this issue that you've been bird dogging since you took the office?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to know is that our office is fully functioning. Right, we are operating at full capacity. People are working remotely, but we're doing everything we would normally do on top of the things that are related to the coronavirus. So, and one of those really important priorities we've had is, we've talked about the Safer Streets Initiative and sort of law and order agenda, but on the safe kits, to make sure that these victims have a voice. And so we take that seriously. That doesn't stop. Those labs that we send the tests to are considered essential businesses, so that work continues. We've had to alter how we assemble or collect those kits because of social distancing, but that work still, we've got more kits going to that lab this week, because as I've said before, we want to honor the courage of the victims who've come forward. So we're going to continue to work on that. That work continues, and it's very important.
Let's talk about the campaign. Since the last time you've been here, you filed for election as Attorney General. Can you campaign if you just stopped campaigning? What do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, my focus right now is the job at hand, and there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things going on, and I'm fully dedicated to that. There's a lot of work to do, and it's important work. I mean, when you think about this position, as the first person in my family I didn't know any lawyers growing up, so I was the first person to go to law school. I take this job very seriously. It's a high honor for me, and I very much view it as the lawyer for 6 million Missourians. I'm their advocate. So when we see things like price gouging, when we see things like China covering up the origins of the coronavirus, you know, it's incumbent upon me to act on behalf of my neighbors and my community.
Well, let me ask you about a roster of 25 Missourians that are near and dear to my heart. When can the Attorney General restart the Cardinal season? Can you play a role in that?
That we have immense power in the office, but I don't think it extends that far. But I don't know what's going to happen. I know they're talking about different plans. I would love to. I mean, I've spent, as you know, I listen to KMOX at night. They're doing the 2011 run. That was a very smart move by them. And so to kind of relive in the lineup they had in 2011. I watched the 82, they had game 2, which I actually went to as a kid.
Oh.
It was the first game I really kind of remember. I went with my dad, and I remember coming through that tunnel at the old Busch.
Everything hit you, yeah.
Yeah, and everything was so green and white and red, and I still remember that. So to watch that game on TV, I'm not going to lie, if I was trying to pause it to see if I could see myself as a 7-year-old. So I've watched a lot of the reruns, but it's time to, I'd love to see real baseball on the field. But I think they're talking about, and then we want to do that when it's safe, of course, and Major League Baseball's talking about that.
Well, if you're in a meeting with the president, and you're sitting down with President DeWitt, and you need a test person to watch the games at Busch just to see the medical effects, I'll step up on behalf of the state. I'll go to the games, the first 40 or 50 of them, whatever you guys think, and I'll report back. You can take my temperature or whatever. I'll serve.
I think you'd be a good candidate for that. But I think they're talking. Maybe they play in Arizona. Maybe they play in empty stadiums. Maybe they have a fourth of the capacity. There's a lot of ideas being thrown about, and I'm obviously interested too because we need baseball back as soon as it's safe to do so.
Well, good luck. And as this lawsuit unfolds, hope you'll come back and give us an update on this week in Missouri politics. We will. Be right back. Kind of keep with our social distancing. We have Jane Dueker and Steele Shippy in. Should be fun after this.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association.
Your energy needs are changing. That's why at Ameren, Missouri, we're not waiting on the future. We're building it with the Smart Energy Plan, advancing thousands of projects across the state, helping reduce emissions through cleaner energy sources, boost reliability with self-healing equipment, and better withstand storms with new composite poles. Moving Missouri forward and bringing us all a little closer together. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back this week at Missouri Politics. We're not going to do a full opinion maker panel, but I think these two could make up for two. Steele Shippy, the campaign manager for Governor Parson, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
And Jane Dueker, a star of radio, television, Twitter, a longtime Democratic operative. Thank you for joining us again.
Great to be here.
Let's talk right off the top, Steele, the state's response. I think we had Governor Parson on the show last week kind of discussing the agony he had in issuing a stay-at-home order. I think he's talked about how May 3rd, maybe it's trending to where maybe that order can be lifted. He tried to do a diverse response for a long time. I think he may be leading towards one again. What is the thoughts of the governor's office on how you do reopen such a diverse state?
Well, I think that there's challenges that the governor's been presented from day one, but he stepped up to the plate and said that he's going to work for all Missourians, not just a particular group of Missourians. And Missouri being so diverse, there are challenges that are presented in both the urban areas and rural areas. And I think that now that we're 45, 50 days into the COVID-19 response, and Missourians have seen how the governor's been a steady leading hand, calm hand at the ship, being very deliberate in his response and the administration's response, caring for first responders, Missourians, getting relief out the door quickly. And I think that now working in tandem with President Trump and trying to reopen in a data-driven way to make sure that we still protect the health and safety of Missourians while reopening the economy and getting Missourians back to work. And I think that is most important as we go into this time about how we're going to handle the reopening of the state on May 4th, and the governor's going to have more information on that this coming week.
Jane Dueker, you know a little bit about sitting in that governor's office. You were chief of staff to Governor Holden. It is a very diverse state. How do you go make somebody happy that runs Spud's Tavern in Marys County and runs Schmitty's out in West St. Louis County? It is a challenge. You either it's almost like you're going you're Goldilocks trying the porridge. Too much for rural folks, too little for urban folks. How do you get it right?
It's very challenging. I mean, when we had the budget crisis, when I was in the governor's office, making those decisions, and they are agonizing. And I sympathize with any executive right now because it is a very difficult time to govern. And so I think that Governor Parson is being hampered by the federal government, because I think the safest and the best way to deal with this right now is to get testing done. And I think the fact that has not been widely available and the federal government didn't use their power, I think everyone would feel safer with more testing. I think, there's only so much control he has over that. The stuff is available or it's not available.
None.
And I do think that hampers, because I think people want to feel safe. And I think testing helps people feel safe. I mean, I think if people were able to get a test, they would do it.
Well, practically speaking, it's a little tough. Governor Holden was governor of Missouri at a time George W. Bush was in the White House of a different party.
It's right after 9/11.
If Barack Obama was in the White House, it would be a little hard to say the test that we think we should have, we don't have. It does put you in a bit of a box.
It does.
Reality.
It's reality, and I think everybody's learning, which is tough sometimes, because during a crisis to learn. But I also don't think this is going to be our first pandemic. I think this is going to keep happening, and I think that the lessons that are being learned, I hope people do learn from them, and we are able to better prepare for these types of crises. It's a world economy, and unfortunately, I think this is going to be the kind of thing that we're going to have to stand and be ready for, and unfortunately, this is our first one.
So I was a fan of his initial approach. Governor Parson stepped out and said, "I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna treat different cities differently." I mean, West Central Butler County is different than Central West End in the city of St. Louis. Coming out of this, I mean, I don't know that you really have a hard time treating Oregon County like you do Overland here in a suburb. How do you, moving forward, do you give local folks a little bit of leeway to do what they think's right?
I think that's exactly what you're going to see continue from the governor's office come May 4th, and he's given great latitude to the local authorities across the state to make the best decisions that directly impact the local citizens. I also think you're going to continue to see the governor work in public-private partnerships across the state with testing, bringing those resources together. From day one, the governor knew that would be important, because the government is not the only answer to this response, that Missourians are going to have to step up, private businesses will step up, and I think that we have seen Missourians shown a great response to this, and the governor is trying to tap into the power that is the Missouri people and unleash them, and responding to this in the best way forward.
Well, it is a point. I mean, just because the government doesn't force you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it or you can't do it. You can stay at home whether the government tells you to stay at home or not, right?
Right. And the governor has said that, again, from his first state of emergency, which started on, it was March 13th, and then fast forward a week later, March 20th, March 22nd. Correct me on the dates on that, but staying home was one of the early messages that the governor was imploring with people. He got criticized for not issuing an order, but I think the social distancing order and the constant imploring on with whether it's media interviews or his daily briefings that began to provide transparency to Missourians that staying home was the best way to fight this virus, and now we're going to get this economy back open.
He got criticized in the urban media for not issuing more government orders. He got criticized in other parts of the state for issuing government orders. I mean, it is complex. Jane, I'm a simple West Butler County hillbilly. You are a very complicated West St. Louis County lawyer. Tell me, is there a better way to do it than to give local folks a chance to make their own decisions based on the health situation, the economic situation in their county? Is there a better way to go about it in Missouri?
I don't think you can do it any other way. Yeah. I mean, I think he has the power. I think he could preempt all of the local jurisdictions, and he's not done that. And I do think that is the best way to do it. And I think that I think both of, like especially in St. Louis, the county executive and the mayor, I mean, they have to decide what is good for those citizens. Now, it is going to get a little strange if, so St. Charles and Jeffco, if they start opening up and then St. Louis County doesn't, and it's going to get messy. But I think there really is no one size fits all. And you know, having been in the governor's office, you realize that. And so I do think Missouri's always been based on kind of a local control. We've always been a local control state, and I think that's probably the appropriate response. But sometimes you have to step in, and I think getting equipment, doing things like that the state has better power in order to get those things, then I think that's when you rely on the state for that, and I think that's happened generally.
You got to have people have to be complicit. The governor had to be complicit for you to be able to govern them. And when you're in St. Louis, people elect more liberal leaders. They're more comfortable with government telling them what to do. They expect government to do more for them and tell them what to do. You get out to Shannon County, they ain't real keen on the government. You start conservation agents, no one. They really don't want a lot of government. Maybe you let Shannon County folks, and with tourism, they may even respond in an unexpected way.
Well, when you're dealing with urban areas, I mean, you're dealing with a concentration of population, which is a completely different dynamic when you're dealing with a pandemic. So I think that I think frankly, the local leaders are supposed to be, you know, more equipped to understand those challenges. And
I think early on, some of the local leaders wanted the governor to make the decision that was a tough decision to issue these orders. They issued them. I think they saw a lot of their population supported them in that. Still, let me ask you the question: when we get on the other side of this, whatever that looks like, Governor Parson has walked the walk of meeting with local folks, even to his own political detriment sometimes. He has had an open line with Lyda Cruz, and he's went over to Quentin Lucas's chambers and gave a speech. He knows Brian Treese. That Ken McClure knows where to park when he comes to visit the governor at the Capitol. However, when you talk about local control, when you get into other issues, I think you're going to see some supporters of school issues and things repeat that local control issue back to the governor.
Yeah, I think that the governor has handled the local control issue in the best way possible.
Yeah.
He has routine conversations on a weekly basis, often daily basis, with hundreds of local leaders across the state to ensure that everybody's input from local representation is fed into the governor's office and how he calculates and is very careful and deliberate in making decisions. And I think you're going to continue to see that happen. And I think that's also in his, the four-phased approach to, opening back up the economy is making sure that those local entities, local leaders, Missourians and businesses all across the state have input into how this is going to work, how are we going to do it. It's a week-to-week basis, and I think that you're going to continue to see that play out as the governor makes decisions.
I think everybody has to be nimble.
Because you're a school board president in, let's say, East Carter County, and you were trusted with life and death decisions in a global pandemic. Are you not going to say maybe I should have more decisions about how we educate the kids here in East Carter?
No, and I think you see that. I mean, I think you see the St. Louis County and St. Louis City, which I'm the most familiar with, and Kansas City, actually doing what they think is best. They've got different challenges, and I think they're trying to do that. Some have done better than others, in my opinion, but I think that they're supposed to be the ones that are the most familiar. And so I think that's gone pretty well. I think the relationships between the St. Louis leaders and the governor, it appears to be going smoothly, and that's important. And so they know what they need, and they'll ask when they need it. And so I think it's a challenge. It really is, and I think people have to be nimble. And I think that there may be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. I mean, that could happen. But I think that with communication and constant vigilance, the leaders will hopefully respond.
One thing I've seen Governor Parson not be all that nimble on is allowing people out of jail because of this pandemic. I think some folks in St. Louis County want to do that. I don't think he's been real keen on that.
No, and I think it's happened both in the city and the county, and I think residents, this was not good timing. I think being opportunistic and using a pandemic to push an agenda to let people out of prison and out of jail who shouldn't be. We just saw some of the cases, and they keep repeating. And you have police forces that feel demoralized when it's catch and release game, and they go out there, put literally their lives on the line. They could get sick, and to enforce crime, and then to only find out it's not going to be charged, or the person's going to get out and do the same thing. The most scary thing, I think, is the domestic violence people. I mean, you are under an order to stay home, and you're sending domestic violence abusers to stay home with the people they abuse. I can't, and I don't think most citizens feel like that's a great idea.
Still, the folks that have followed the governor's career, he is a sheriff, so low control fits with what his whole life's been about. But he's also a sheriff, so this isn't very surprising he's not for letting folks out early.
Yeah, the governor is a law and order governor. We have laws in place for a particular reason, and you know, he spent 22 years plus in law enforcement, and so he knows how to protect our communities, and he's going to keep doing that. He's working alongside Department of Corrections and Director Ann Precythe, who's the director there, and I think you're going to continue to see the governor be very diplomatic, listen to concerns, but also remind folks that we do have law and order in the state.
Jane, I was glad when you were able to come in this week, because so we had a budget shortfall, I guess, right after the stock market issues in 08. We also had an enormous budget shortfall after 9/11, and you were in the Chief of Staff's office when that happened.
It's rough.
Legislators are showing back up tomorrow to start to craft a budget. Is there any other way around, especially with the supplemental, of kind of trusting the executive branch to spend this money?
Well, look, I think I'm a fan that there's separation of powers, and all three branches got to work together, and it's going to be rough. And so I think what we dealt with when I was in the governor's office is we had a Republican legislature who would over appropriate because they didn't want to make the tough decisions as to what needs to be cut because you have a budget crisis. So then it was left to the executive, and it came in the form of withholdings, and that happened in 08 as well, where the executive is forced to make the cuts because they have to do the withholdings because we have to balance the budget and pay the bills. I'm hoping that there's a lot of cooperation, because there's only so much general revenue. What people don't realize is the biggest pots of money that the governor and the legislature have control over are K through 12 education, higher ed, and prisons, and Medicaid. Those are the drivers. So none of those decisions are easy. They're all painful. And so I suspect that, yes, we're going to get federal money, but it's not going to be rosy, and the economy is not going to turn on like this. And people aren't going to automatically, just because they can go out doesn't mean they will. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to be some tough decisions coming. My only advice to both the legislature, having been through this, the legislature and the governor, is do it early. Because the later you get in the budget year, the more difficult it is. And I think you don't have options. And he's already had to withhold, right?
We're getting a little late in the show, so Steele Shippy with a minute left to won the week.
People of Missouri have won the week. And I think they've won the past month, and how they've stepped up and responded to this public health crisis, and have stood together and worked together to combat this, and we're going to come out of it stronger than ever before.
Who won the week?
Lyda Cruzan. I think this has been the shining moment of her administration. I think she's done a great job being transparent, being non-political. I think the police department could use a little work, but I think she's done a phenomenal job, and I hope that she keeps it going from when this does start to open, because the hard part's coming when this economy has to get moving again.
It's going to be hard for her. I think a lot of the rest of the state's going to open up before the city of St. Louis does, for logical reasons.
Right, but I think her citizens are feeling pretty good about her, and they feel that she's done the right thing, and I've been very impressed. I think this has been the shining moment of her administration.
I'm going to say John Combest, the purveyor of johncombest.com, been in the news a lot recently. It appears if you want to start your day like I do, and many state leaders do, and apparently all the media does, go to johncombest.com for all the day's headlines. And he won the week. We'll see you next week here on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.